Today we're taking another look at the class of 59, this time with the Asahi Pentax H2, so stay tuned. So far we've covered two other cameras in the class of 59 series, the Nikon F and the Canon Flex. Now those cameras were the first 35mm SLRs from those two companies. But the Asahi Pentax H2 wasn't the first SLR from Pentax. They'd already been in the SLR game for a few years. In fact, their 35mm cameras had always been SLRs. They never produced any rangefinders. But 1959 was still a notable year for Pentax for one mechanical improvement: all the shutter speeds available on the same dial. If you remember back to the episode on the Exacta Varex, its shutter speed controls were split into two different places. You had fast shutter speeds on one dial, and then you had slow speeds on another. And the Pentax cameras that came before the H2, beginning with the Asahi Flex in 1952, followed that same design. Now, for clarification's sake, the cameras marked H2 and those marked S2 are the same models. When they were imported into the U.S. by Honeywell Corporation, the S2s were rebadged as H2. And most of those cameras will have a Honeywell H2 nameplate. This one is sort of odd though, because it has the Asahi Pentax nameplate instead of Honeywell, and it's an H2. But in any case, blame all the confusion on marketing. But let's look at the camera. The single shutter speed dial is found on the top right shoulder of the camera, with speeds from 1 to 1/500th of a second, plus B and T. Now, one thing to note is that there is a blank spot on the dial that does have a detente. Some later Pentax cameras, like the SP500, did indeed have a hidden 1/1000th second shutter speed in this spot. And they wouldn't be the first camera maker to leave the top speed off of a shutter speed dial for marketing purposes. But is this a hidden speed? Maybe. We'll test it out when we go shoot. Also on the right shoulder is where you'll find the film winding lever and the shutter release button. There's no automatic frame counter, so you'll need to reset it to 0 every time you load the film. There's also a little window next to the shutter dial. When the shutter is cocked, it will show red, so that means it's ready to go. Over on the left shoulder is the rewind crank, and near the bottom left are the flash sync sockets. There's one for X and FP sync. The lens that was supplied with this camera was the Takumar 55mm f2, and it's a semi-automatic lens. This means that the diaphragm doesn't return to full open after an exposure. To recock the diaphragm after an exposure, you use the lever on the lens. This resets it to full open and allows you to clearly see your subject to focus. When you fire the shutter, the aperture stops down to the preset value you chose. And speaking of the aperture, this lens has a 10-bladed diaphragm. Cool. Another thing to note is that the camera has no built-in meter. It would be about another 5 years or so before Pentax released the Spotmatic, which was their first camera with a meter. And that's about all there is to it. It's a pretty simple camera, and that's one of the things I love about it. There's not much to get in the way of making photos. Now, for the shoot today, I'll also be using the little Asahi meter again. It performed so well in the last video, I decided to use it on another shoot before sending it back. The only trouble with using it with this camera is that there's no cold shoe to mount it in. But guess what? Pentax made a removable shoe mount that clips on the viewfinder window frame. So we are set. Let's go have some fun. Today we're looking at the Pentax H2. And I'm also going to use that external meter that I used in the Ashikamat video, the Asahi AHM1. I'm going to get one more shoot out of it before I send it back to the folks at Per Gear. But it worked so well for the other video, even compared to the spot meter that I was using, that I'm going to pretty much just trust it to do what it needs to do today. Let's find our first shot. So I'm on the Carrollton Greenbelt again this morning. You know, we don't have a lot of leaves on the trees. We got a lot of direct sun. We got some good shadows here. But I think there may be a shot down this walk that we can get. It'll be backlit, but it'll be a good test for this meter too. So I've got this meter set to ISO 100, and I'm using it in shutter priority mode. And I have the shutter speed set to 1/125th of a second. So the trick is to actually make sure your camera is pointing in the right direction, you know, to do the metering. So you have to get the camera set and then you click the button, because you can't do this, all right, because then it's metering off the ground. So you have to have it sort of aimed right. All right. So 125th of a second, let's see what it tells us. 125th of a second at 6.3, all right. So that's halfway between 5.6 and f8, and that works for this lens. So let's get a few shots. We'll shade the lens just a little bit. Let's also do that at 1/60th of a second. You get a vertical out of this too. And bracket that again to 1/60th of a second. So every time you take a photo, the aperture closes down. It doesn't automatically open back up. So you have to use this lever to reset it to wide open so it's easy to focus. But that's it. So these trees behind me, we got some nice light coming in, very hard light, creating some shadows. And then the bark on these trees is really detailed. So I'm gonna shoot wide open. Let's see if I can do that. So one of the drawbacks to this camera, I guess, is that the highest shutter speed is 1/500th of a second. However, there is one click stop just above 1/500th of a second that I might try. Maybe it's a hidden 1,000th of a second. Anyway, I'm gonna meter right through here. We'll get some shallow depth of field and see how that goes. All right, so if I meter this, all right, so it tells me 1/500th of a second at 3.5. All right, 1/500th of a second at 3.5. Horizontal of this too. All right, I want to go at 2.8 as well. Get vertical and horizontal out of this. Let's try shooting it at that empty spot between 500 and T, just to see what happens. All right, so let's crank this shutter speed up to 1/1000th of a second. 1/1000th of a second at f2. Let's see, make sure that's right. Well, 1/1000th of a second at 2.5. All right, so here's hoping. And we'll do one horizontal too. All right, see what else we can find. All right, so there's another shot over here. So we got this light coming in, these hard shadows. Looking at this detail, the spider webs off of there though. So hopefully we'll get some nice surface detail out of this. I want to turn it back to, let's go 1/250th of a second. All right. Set my meter to 1/250th of a second. All right, and let's take a reading. And this says f5. Okay. Let's also go f4. So there's another possible shot. We've got sun coming in this way, so we get shadows over on this side. We're shooting across the stream. I'm gonna try to do some shallow depth of field, so let's see how that works. 1/200th of a second at f5. So I'm gonna go to aperture priority mode, and I'm gonna try to shoot at wide open at f2, and let's see what happens. 1/1000th of a second at f2.2. All right, we'll set it on that invisible 1/1000th of a second shutter speed for a couple, and then I'll move it to 1/500. So 3.2 at 1/500th of a second. Now if we want a deeper depth of field, say f11, it's 1/40th of a second at f11. So I'll need the tripod for this. All right, so we got the tripod on, I got the shot set up at f11. All right, 1/40th of a second. Now, 1/40th of a second. There's not really that speed on this camera, but there is an X sync between 30 and 60. So I'm guessing that's pretty close to 40, but I'll move to 30 right after this anyway. All right. There's one. I'm gonna make sure I get some blur in there. Let's see how slow of a shutter speed I can get. I go to f22. It's 1/10th of a second at f22. So let's put that at f8. Let's put that at 1/8 of a second. Frame it up again. I have no idea how sharp this lens is at f22. We'll find out. All right. Let's do another one just in case. I think there may be a shot through here. It's a little bit more direct sun than I would want. There's no shadows on this side. But if I were across, there'd be shadows. Well, let's do a couple here and then I will find a way across and get that side. All right, so I'm gonna shoot at f16 and see what see what the meter says. 1/20th of a second at f16. Let's go 1/15th of a second at f16 so because I don't have 1/20th of a second here. All right. f22 is 1/10th of a second. I want to go 1/8 of a second with that. All right, so I'll get a fast shutter speed version of this with the water and the slow. So we'll go with the slow first. f22 at 1/8 of a second. All right. Now let's do with a shallow depth of field. So if we go f2.8 at 500. All right, so 2.8, 500. All right. Yeah. So what's my counter on? We are on 24.
All right, so I've got this little shaded area lined up for a shot. And try some blur. So I've metered it at 1/10 of a second or 1/8 of a second at f/16. All right. Let's do that again. Make sure I'm focused. Reset aperture, because at f/16 I certainly can't tell what's going on. All right, so for this shot, I'm going to shoot across these rocks. I'm still on the sunny side, which I don't particularly like, and I'm still going to go across in a minute. But while I'm here, I'm going to try to get this. Got it framed up. All right, what does the meter tell me? Let's do 125th of a second at 5.6. So the next thing to do here is just go across to the other side and shoot into the light. Maybe that won't cause too much flare. We will see. All right, so I've got this log going across with the little waterfall in the back there. Let's do a reading here. I'm going to use a sort of a shallow depth of field if possible. It says 1/500th of a second at 3.2. Well, let's just stick with that and see. I am shading this a little bit because I don't know. I don't really have a lens hood. Still couple at 2.8 as well. This might make a better shot without this. All right, so let's try it again without the twigs in the way. Shade. And that's it for that roll. So that was another good test of this meter. Got one roll shot. Just run out of time. The lighting is getting sort of bad. But we did get one good roll off of that. It was Kentmere 100, by the way, so I'm going to process that in Ilfosol 3 this time and just see how that turns out. See if I like it better than D76 1:1. Let's go process this and see what we got.
I hate that I only got one roll shot today, but time was scarce and it was a bit chilly out there. I didn't really have any exposure problems regarding this little meter. This was the second shoot I used it on, and I've yet to see a reason for me to doubt its capability. Simply put, it works, even in backlit situations. So again, if you're thinking about getting one of these, I do recommend it. And I'll put Amazon links for the UK and US down in the description. And if you use those links, it does help support this channel. So thanks in advance. As for the H2, it worked just fine. And it really is sort of liberating to use a camera. You only have to worry about the basics of photography. Composition, focus, shutter speeds, and f-stops. Modern cameras are so complex and complicated. You know, one of the photography classes I teach deals only with how to operate a modern camera. And there's so much to learn that it's a multi-session course. The only real drawback of the H2 is the lack of a real 1/1000th of a second shutter speed. Now, even though I did set the camera on that hidden speed notch for a few shots, it's evident that it's not 1/1000th of a second. It's a bit faster than 1/500th, but definitely not a full stops difference. I did some web research after the shoot, and the general consensus is that it's an unregulated speed. So who knows what it really is. I also want to draw attention to something that I learned the hard way. Not on this particular camera, but on a Pentax H1. Not all Pentax Takumar M42 mount lenses are compatible. On later model lenses, the diaphragm actuation pins are just a little bit longer than the ones on these early lenses. And there is a light baffle just in front of the focusing screen on these early cameras. If you mount a later model lens that has the longer pin, you may not be able to remove it without damaging the baffle. At least that's what happened to me. But using the H2 with the correct lenses is like having all of your photography burdens lifted. And pair it with one of these little meters and you've got yourself a fun little camera. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. If so, please share it. Also be sure to leave a like and subscribe so you won't miss anything. I've got new content each week. Also, be sure to check the description for the links to purchase one of these little meters. I don't think you will regret it. So until next time, thank you for doing what you're doing to help keep film photography alive and well. See you next time.